This is Kevin Conroy, and I am the goddamn Batman.
You've just jumped inside the pull bag. Join TFG1 Mike and the rest of the comic reading crew here at the GCRN as they make their great escape into comics. From DC, Marvel, IDW, Boom Studios, Zenoscope, and more, we have everything you want to read right here. Transformers comics? Yeah, we cover that. He-Man? Yeah, sure. DC superheroes like Batman, Batgirl, Nightwing, and Batman Beyond? Yep, we have those too. How about TMNT from IDW and I Hate Fairyland from Image Comics? Yeah, we have all that here. Plus, so much more. It's all inside the pull bag here on the Geekcast Radio Network. So without any further ado, it's time to talk about the comics we are reading right now here inside the pull bag.
Hello and welcome to the Pull Bag. This is episode 331. I'm, of course, TFG1 Mike. Joining me for the first time since our I Hate Fairyland coverage is Comic World Dan. Hello, sir. The Comic Concierge.
How's it going?
It's going. This is actually, and I'll introduce the other guest in a moment. This is actually a Pullbag Comic Concierge crossover. It's actually all the secondary guests' fault here. Because you had trying to be DJV from Simplistic Reviews on Comic Concierge to talk about Gotham Central. I listened to that episode and I'm like, oh, we should do DC's Black Label Batman White Knight. Everybody say hello to DJ.
Hello, Vinny. It's your Uncle Bingo. Time to pay the check.
Mm-hmm. Yup.
Batman 89. Anybody know Batman 89? Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton, Kim Basinger, Arliss. Come on.
Of course.
Arliss.
Arliss was in there somewhere, wasn't he?
Wow.
Yeah. He was there, you know.
He was Alexander Knox, wasn't he?
I was in a Robert Wall.
Yeah, that's Alexander Knox. Yep. What's crazy is I saw Pat Hingle in a movie the other day.
Oh.
Wasn't anything new, but obviously because I think he's passed on, but I could be wrong. I think he did die. I don't remember.
Oh, Commissioner Gordon in '89. He's in is it Hang 'em High? He's like a bad guy in one of these Clint Eastwood movies. I'm pretty sure it's Hang 'em High. And every time I see him, I'm like, that's Commissioner Gordon from Batman '89.
Yep, exactly. And the only reason why I kind of recognized him was not the way that he looked, it was the way that he sounded. And I'm like, wow. All I can hear in my brain is, oh, God, we got to keep a lid on this. If this gets out...
You got to keep a lid on this one.
Whole city is going to hell. So Sean Murphy's Batman White Knight from DC Comics. This is the first release for DC's new imprint Black Label. Now let me ask you guys, what do you think of Black Label, Dan?
Well, this isn't actually Black Label. Like it might. So to clarify, when it was first released, Black Label wasn't a thing that existed. Black Label's first actual book that was released was Batman Damned, and there was thought that I think the trade was going to be released under the Black Label branding.
It is because I see the logo right here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more retroactively going back and changing it. I understand. And the thought was then they would actually, because Sean Murphy has some like unedited versions of Black Knight, White Knight that we thought were going to be in the trade, but ended up not being. But anyways, regarding the idea of Black Label, it kind of makes sense. Trying to, especially with a book like this that exists outside of the normal DC universe, it's kind of its own thing. It gives creators the freedom to kind of do whatever they want. They can go for a more mature tone, and DC's was doing that a lot with a lot of books that were outside the realm of what their normal continuity was, but kind of maybe loosely connected, like Mr. Miracle, which is more so in continuity, but definitely geared towards mature readers. They have Vertigo, but it wasn't necessarily Vertigo, so it's a good in between. So I'm interested in seeing where it goes. I do think, though, because DC right now has a lot of different labels that they're doing. I think Jeff Johns is going to have his own label starting next, off-print, I should say, starting next year as well. They're trying to relaunch Vertigo. They just had Young Animal, but that's kind of no longer going on because most of those titles didn't do very well. But ultimately, I think if long as the books are good, and I don't know if like they're gonna now moving forward if they release something like this, Saga of Swamp Thing by Alan Moore, which was Vertigo, or they're now gonna bring that in over to Black Label, or what's gonna be like quote unquote Black Label. But I just don't. I hope they didn't learn the wrong lesson from Batman White Knight, thinking why it was so successful was because it was dark and more adult. And then try to double down on that. We get some crazy edginess that's ridiculous that we got in the 90s. So that's my concern. But obviously this is very separate since this one existed before Black Label was a thing.
Yeah. What about you, DJ?
I'm full disclosure. I don't know if you would even consider this. I guess I'm not a real big Elseworlds What If fan to begin with. There are very few I really like. Punisher Heroes in the Marvel Universe. And that's probably it. Mainly because of my myopic view of Elseworld stories. I like characters kind of the way they are. Even if there is growth.
But Stephen Amell is going to be Barry Allen. Come on, you gotta love that.
Yeah, that's what I can't wait for that. Because even if there's growth there, it doesn't count because it's limited. So it's like I can't even even if I'm enjoying it, it's only these 5 issues. Bye. So I'm not really a huge Elseworlds fan. I didn't know much about this book going in. I had heard the title, and I didn't know. And I think somebody had mentioned, oh yeah, it's like a what if situation. So going in, I was just kind of like, okay, win me over, book, win me over, and I'll hold my thoughts on if it won me over or not until we get into it.
Absolutely. For me, a comic, not just DC, not just Marvel, any comic company, they need to, in my personal opinion, market towards a wide audience. And if that is going to mean that they use a new imprint to show more adult stories than what is in the Rebirth or the New 52 or the old continuity, and as long as it's separate from their kiddie stuff kind of a thing, sure, go for it, great. For me it's like, this to me obviously it's not a one shot, but it's a mini series that is separate from like what is Tom King still writing Batman, Dan? I don't. Sometimes they change writers, so I'm not sure.
No, he's
okay.
He's currently writing Batman, and he's probably set in for at least the next 50 issues. So
okay, so like Tom King is currently writing Batman. He's been writing Batman since the New 52 ended, Rebirth started. Scott Snyder is off doing whatever Scott Snyder is off doing. The way I look at White Knight is, and the way I look at stories like this is, it gives another creator a chance to do something with the character without affecting the continuity of the main writer of the main series of the main thing. So I think these are cool. I actually enjoyed this story. It's one of, if not the better, if not the best reversal of fortune Joker stories I've ever seen. Because how often have we seen the whole, hey, let's make the Joker the good guy and Batman the bad guy kind of thing? You don't see that a lot. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I guess it's interesting because I'm kind of the opposite of DJ in that realm, where I don't care at all about continuity. Like in my personal world, like if they got rid of continuity altogether and just did whatever like they did back like the Civil Age, really before fittingly Stan Lee was like the person that really made universes matter, made continuity matter. But I'd be fine if continuity wasn't a thing. But I get why people enjoy it, because you get this. It's unlike anything else. You get legitimately a 60-year-long story. But I think in this, you said that you reversal fortunes of the idea of Batman and Joker. But I think that's what it maybe presents itself as to start with. But it ends up being something very different than that by the end.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's just the basic, quote unquote premise kind of thing, or what most of the copy says. Like on the back of the book, it says something about What would happen if the roles were reversed, kind of thing? As I mentioned earlier, Sean Murphy, writer and artist on this. Matt Hollingsworth is the colorist. Todd Klein is letterer, with Sean and Matt doing the covers. I love almost all of the covers that they've done for this series. I thought they were really, really cool.
Of all the things I really dug about this book, art's probably number one. Sean Murphy's art's kind of like if, like Greg Capullo and Joe Mad had like a baby for some reason. It kind of like, oh wow, that looks kind of like old school Greg Capullo, and oh wait a minute, there's that kind of anime kind of face there. I really like the art. I'm trying to think of all the things I like. I'm not really a big fan of this book. I like the use of nostalgia in one section of the story. I won't spoil it. Let's just say it has to deal with transportation. I really like the stuff they did with Freeze and Alfred. That stuff I didn't really see coming with Freeze, but I bought it automatically. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I never I don't. Dan, you have to remind me. Have they ever dealt with that backstory with Freeze before? Is that an original thing for this book?
I don't believe so. I don't think they ever had that. To my knowledge,
you mean the thing with his father?
The thing with his father, yes. Yeah, that I was like, I was like, I don't remember that ever. I know it wasn't in the anime series, but I was like, was it in a book that I missed? maybe they brought it up or something.
I'm pretty sure they have not until now.
That's a cool way to introduce the, at least connect we're tap dancing around the freeze technology, how it developed with him. I was like, oh, that's kind of a stretch where I was like, I could buy it. I could understand it. When it comes to things they do with other certain characters, I guess we'll get into later, I couldn't buy it all the way.
Yeah. What do we think of how the books are laid out? Not the art, not the images, not the story, but what I'm meaning is like I'm looking at cover 1 and you open it up and it has this black and white drawing and then it has the quote, "Given his newfound mental capacity, I think you need to be worried." And that's a quote from this issue that will come up later. What do we think of that formatting for this to make it separate from every other Batman book out there?
Well, I think that might be different because that's not how the issues are laid out. You don't have that opening for the first issue of when it's released by just the opening of the Batmobile traveling up to Arkham Asylum. So you don't get that quote. I don't know if that was just something they were using in the trade to separate it out from different installments. But so I can't really comment on that since it didn't really wasn't presented that same way. But I thought just looking at the actual opening of the story, I thought it was a good way to establish itself because it starts with a very familiar scene of the Batmobile going up Arkham Asylum, and it's a very normal thing. You see a shadowy figure walk in. They let him in. A great Batmobile. I did like the look of the Batmobile, but then it gets changed where you walk in and the person that's in change is not that of a criminal or a known criminal, but that of Batman. And then this slick looking character, but you don't necessarily. I mean, he says his name, Mr. Napier, but I think it's a good way of just that great leap forward in time where it's like, okay, this is where we're heading. Let's see how we get there. So on that way, I thought it did a good job of just establishing the fact that this is a different story. This is like I mentioned, it presents itself as okay. Well, how exactly are we getting to a world where Batman's in jail and the Joker or Jack Napier is driving the Batmobile? So I think it's a good way of just establishing intrigue within only within a few pages.
Yeah, and I really dig this story. I'm gonna say this now, and I will say it at the end of next week's episode as well. White Knight to me is on the same level as Gates of Gotham and Nightwing New Order. White Knight's a little deeper than those are, but it's not the same storytelling, but it's the same. I get the same feeling reading this that I got reading those. Like, I was pulled into the book on almost every single page and panel that I read. And ending the first issue with the Jack Napier thing was really, really cool. The thing... A lot of people don't like the Joker having a name. How do you guys feel about it?
I didn't know I didn't want the Joker to have a name till probably The Dark Knight, when you realize he's just making up his backstory as it goes on. It's like, oh, that's actually what it should always be. He should be a force of nature. It shouldn't matter. You hear me, Joaquin Phoenix? It shouldn't matter what his backstory is. It shouldn't. He's just a force of nature, the polar opposite of Batman. We don't need to know exactly what. I mean, you leave it up to interpretation. Anybody else can, whatever everybody else can fill in, is probably going to be 10 times better than what they give you. This Joaquin Phoenix movie or whatever that we're digressing could be amazing, but it's like, well, somebody's out there probably had a completely opposite or different take on what Joker's origin is, and they're kind of like, like I liked it when I thought he was a comedian that did this, or I liked it when he was a gangster that did this. So I don't really need to know his backstory. When they said the Jack Napier thing, I'm like, oh, I guess they're going 89. But I mean, I don't like him having a name at all. I just like him showing up, doing stuff. No reason to the madness.
Yeah. Dan?
That's what madness is. No reason.
I don't have a preference, to be honest with you, because, I think it's all how you tell the story and the context in which you execute it. Like, for example, The Killing Joke, probably the best Batman, one of the best Batman stories, and probably the best Joker story. You do get a sense of origin within that. Of course, like at the time, that wasn't a book that was quote unquote within continuity, but it worked. And because it was able to kind of look at what would drive a man to become the Joker. And this, I think, it's important because it's its idea of like what could, again, like what is the defining difference between Batman and Joker, and ultimately, Joker's biggest joke would be to get at Batman would not be Joker, to remove that relationship. So I don't necessarily have a preference. I think if you're within continuity, I prefer him not having a backstory. Like I like they have that 3 Joker story coming up, which is going to be another Black Label book. I personally don't. I'm glad that's not within continuity. But for an Elseworld story, or for just trying to do something like this, or even like a movie or what have you, I don't necessarily have a preference. I don't think he needs one. But if you're going to be able to do something with it, which I feel like White Knight did, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. For me, I agree with you. It matters, but it doesn't matter. Whether he does or whether he doesn't. I think what Sean Murphy has done in here has basically been, and we'll get into this further in this episode and next week's as well, he basically took everything that I assume he loves about Batman and the Bat mythos and threw it all into a unique, original story that makes you think about both of these characters, hero and villain, whichever one is in whichever role.
You think he liked See, I got out of this that he didn't like Batman at all. That's why maybe I have my blinders on. But when I'm reading this book, it's almost like a F you to Batman. Because in this entire book, Batman is an irrational psychopath. There's no rhyme or reason to him. He doesn't give a crap about anybody but himself throughout like 95% of the story. That's why I'm like, maybe he just likes the Joker, or he doesn't like the Code of Batman, or I don't know. There's a scene, I don't want to get into, I don't know how we're going to tap dance around the story, but where Batman is just tearing through Gotham, not giving a crap, ignoring his sidekicks, doesn't care. I'm like, that doesn't seem like that seems like Zack Snyder-y Batman. It doesn't seem like Kevin Conroy Batman to me, where he's just like, screw it, I'm gonna drive a car, I don't care if I'm knocking over people. That's kind of how I got it. But again, I have a very tight window with my Batman. So when you expand it to where he doesn't seem to give a crap, and he's throwing caution at the wind, he doesn't care about what Commissioner Gordon is saying, or Dick is saying, or Barbara is saying, and he's just jumping in without thought. It doesn't make me think he likes Batman that much. It makes me think he likes the Joker a lot, but not Batman.
I think it means he likes them both, because Batman, what I got from this story overall is that they both have an unhealthy obsession with each other.
Right, but Batman isn't an arrested psychopath. He's
not
gonna...
Have you not seen Batman Forever? He was driving on rooftops in Batman Forever. Come on now.
On rooftops, Batman Forever. But he wasn't putting people in freaking harm's way like this. This Batman literally is putting people in harm's way and is essentially pie-facing Barbara Gordon the whole time, where she's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" He's just, "Shut up." He doesn't say shut up, but he's like ignoring her because she's making good points of why, which I guess leads to her doing something else. But it's like, I don't see this Batman. I don't see Batman as that person. I don't see Batman as, he takes chances, he causes collateral damage, but he doesn't do it to a point where he's endangering people. And that's kind of what I got from this, where he's just like a monster. Like he didn't listen to anybody.
I don't think it's that he doesn't like Batman. I think it's looking at the problematic nature of a character like Batman and what that would actually mean. And I think this is a different Batman. This is a Batman that, I think that opening sequence of him chasing after Joker the way he is to firmly establish that this is not the normal Batman. This is taking that idea. This is a different world. This is a world without superheroes. This is a world without Superman. This is a world with just Batman in his like universe, really. And it is a very different Batman. It's not necessarily the same one you would get. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. The question is, what do you do with it? And I thought what this did a good job to start with, and we can see how it ends when we talk about it next week, is looking at even a normal Batman and looking at like even the best Batman in the world, even like an Adam West Batman, there are problems that Batman would cause. And I think what this does a good job of is looking at, okay, if Batman existed and did what he did, is he actually, providing there's a selfishness to it in a way, he's going to cause a lot of collateral damage. He's going to cause a lot of issues, destruction, and especially in certain parts of the city, like how Duke is used in this, who is a character I thought was always been useless in normal comics, but in this actually worked pretty well. I thought it did a good job of just pointing out the problematic nature. And, if Bruce Wayne's major goal is always to stop crime and to make Gotham a better place, really would be better. He'd be much more effective of doing that as Bruce Wayne than he would be at Batman, because as Bruce Wayne, he'd be preemptive. He could better the education. He can, really help create a better Gotham.
That's
so
Alfred's
just the
argument.
act of being
Batman
Batman
Dark Knight Rises
has a selfish nature to it.
Yeah. And you had already said, DJ, about the Dark Knight. Like Dan just said, it needs to be, in this, it needs to be Bruce, pulling little sniveling weasels out of cars and ramming his Lamborghini into motorcades like he did in the Dark Knight. So I do agree with that. The thing of it is this story is... It focuses on the relationship of Batman and the Joker to the point of you don't forget about what every other point that's going on, but there were a couple of moments with the freeze angle of it all where I almost got taken out of the story, because I'm like, wait, we're going to freeze now? Is this current or is this in the past? Or not that Sean Murphy did any kind of time jumping, because it's all in the current, time span. Like, it isn't like, oh, this happened years ago kind of a thing. But I mean, this is like Christian Bale Batman on steroids. Or something.
It's more Ben Affleck Batman. Christian Bale's Batman wasn't this. I keep wanting to say psychopathic. It's just there is like there's no man behind this bat in this version. He is essentially just I keep thinking monster, and I think it would have worked for me if, like you're saying, this was completely through Napier's perspective. But because it hops around, like you're saying, to Freeze and Gordon and to Duke and all that stuff, I kind of lose that. Where it's like, I guess in this universe, Batman is essentially the Punisher. He's not even Batman. And people have always asked, or people like my sister and like my friends and cousins, like, what's the difference between Batman and the Punisher other than killing? And I'm like, well, Batman is a detective. He's not like, going around a battle van, driving through the city and shooting up places, not giving a crap. He actually is a tactician in terms of, I have to solve crime and stop crime, but I have to put the people first. I mean, I'm leaning more toward the Paul Dini animated series Batman.
Right.
That is not this Batman. This Batman is like a force, essentially there's nothing to him other than, I have to get the Joker. I have to get the Joker. I have to get the Joker. Stop Batman. That's essentially his one track of thought to him. And that's kind of where I say, well, they stripped this Batman down completely of all of the things that I kind of liked about Batman.
Well, that's also a recent interpretation, right? Because Batman, the original, Detective Comics, that wasn't Batman. He was much more violent. He was much, he did kill, and he did kind of go off on a rampage. So I think that's where you get kind of stuck if it's like, well, this isn't the way I want Batman to be. Well, I guess what I thought this did a good job of doing is establishing up front that this isn't that Batman. This is a different story. And I think the way in the whole journey here to me was getting to that Batman. And like, how do you was giving Batman room to breathe, to actually develop into something rather than just being the same thing. Which is why I'm not usually a huge Batman fan, is because his character is often very stagnant, and I think that leads to kind of repetitive storytelling. What's why I kind of liked about this was like, okay, well, let's play with the formula a little bit here and kind of make him much more of a dick than he normally is. Very, I guess you could say very similar to as a Zack Snyder type of character, but then I don't want to jump ahead to what happens next week, but I thought it was trying to come full circle with it. That was at least my interpretation.
Yeah, it is trying to come full circle with it, and the thing of it is, and you guys mentioned earlier about all the collateral damage that he causes, and that he shouldn't be doing that. Well, neither should Superman and Man of Steel. This is not Batman, Man of Steel. Thank you very much. No, it's not. This is not Henry Cavill Batman. Thank you.
That's Zack Snyder's interpretation of heroes.
Yeah, exactly.
I would actually say he's worse than, because at least in Man of Steel, it's like out of his control. This is Batman making conscious choices of doing wrong.
He knows exactly what he's doing. And people are literally telling him, Batman, you're doing horrible things. And he's like, I don't care. He doesn't say I don't care. But his face is, I don't care.
Yeah, like Henry Cavill, at least in Man of Steel, you could argue, he's fighting a little or another god. Like, he can't control that. This is, these are choices that Batman doesn't necessarily have to make. He doesn't have to speed down and almost run over old people.
Almost.
Yeah, I mean, so he's actively making bad choices in this, and I think that opens up, and I get, the argument could be, maybe Sean Murphy's trying to make it a little bit easier for him to then be able to flip over, because I think that's what this is trying to think, right? Is as we're seeing Batman like this and going to the opening, we see that that image of Batman in jail, to push the idea, to give us the to lead us to believe, all right, well, this is a Batman that's going to go over the edge. This is him on his way to become. Because when I read the first issue, that's where I thought it was going. Was like, okay, well, this is going to be a Batman that eventually becomes the villain here, and where for whatever reason Jack Napier becomes the hero, but then it doesn't necessarily go in that direction. So I don't know if that was a purposeless swerve or what exactly. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I thought it was going to be maybe going in. I thought I was going to do. Remember that Lex Luthor book that came out a while back, and it was like mainly through his perspective, and like through his perspective,
Yeah.
Superman is like this monster. He just always has the red eyes, and I was like, okay, I can buy that because we're looking at it through Luthor. How Luthor he's the hero of his own story, and that's where I thought they were going. Where Joker is the hero of his own story in this, but it's not that. It's essentially just in this story, Joker is the good guy and Batman is the bad guy.
Yeah.
And then we kind of like they're going with that concept, and not to jump ahead, but near the end they kind of like don't go all the way with it. I guess they kind of like I don't know, come a little bit short. Because I think it would have worked better for me if they just would have went full bore. Okay, we're in the mind of the Joker. All right, this is the Joker's story. In this story, Batman to him is this creature who doesn't give a crap. He's entertaining to the Joker, but he does the same horrible things he does. Batman doesn't realize that Joker understands or sees something in Batman, and Batman doesn't see himself that he's also causing all this damage. That's what I thought I was going to go, and it kind of doesn't do that. And I think that's where I was like, oh, this is just an interpretation of Batman where Batman's a dick. Okay. I guess I have to take this.
I think too, part of it was Joker, or thinking of what would be like, how could he actually defeat Batman? Like, what besides just like killing people? How could he actually defeat Batman? And one of the ways to do that would be better than Batman. Would be like the become who he is.
They messed that up too, though. They messed it up. I'm right. Okay, you're saying be better than what he is, and I thought they were going to do that because the one thing I've always been constant is Joker is as smart as Batman. He's just insane, essentially, right? And I thought they were going to do that, where Joker is going to beat. He's going to use his wits and his guile and his cunning to beat Batman, almost have the city turn against him. But then they do this thing which literally made me scream bullshit in my room when I was reading it. I won't spoil it, but he doesn't use cunning and guile to beat Batman. He uses brute force. I'm like, bullshit. There's no. If you're going to go the way where Joker beats Batman, have Joker beat Batman in the wit way. Because Batman can't do shit about that. What is, I keep going to Dark Knight, where Ledger goes, all your strength, all your plan, you can't do shit about this. You can't, I beat you. You can punch me all you want. Doesn't matter. I win. That's how Joker beats Batman. Not, I'm going to whoop your ass. That's the part where I was like, what? Certain things in this book kind of just made me go, oh, you look like you're going one way, and you went the other way, and it's not subverting my expectations. It's almost like you half-stepped. You froze, and you changed your course for some reason.
Yeah, I don't. But what I was going to say is, it's not that I was doing that, and I think he was using his wits. He wasn't necessarily using his wits. He was using the public against him. Like, that was, he was basically becoming, that politician, becoming that hope that Batman never was. It wasn't necessarily designed at first to be that physical. It was part of that. It was utilizing, Clayface to have all the control of the different villains and kind of doing what he couldn't do, and then turning them against him. Within this, so it wasn't necessarily he was trying to punch his way out of it per se, but utilizing the very city against him that he thought he was saving.
I dug that. That part was cool. But then near the end, that's skipping ahead a little bit, he does punch his way out of it, which I didn't want him to do. I want him to completely not go physical with Batman. That's not how you beat Batman. You beat Batman by outthinking Batman.
Yes, but however, this is a Batman Joker story. You cannot have a Batman Joker story without the two of them having a knockdown, drag out physical fight at least one time.
Sure, but the way he does it is not like the way the one the story was setting up, and two, their dynamic has ever been. There's no, God, Bane the fight should have been, if there was a Bane Batman fight, I could see that happening. But there's no effing way I've ever seen in any interpretation the way this fight ends. Never. I don't know if this is again, it's something new, but sometimes you do something new, Last Jedi, and it's like, what?
Oh,
what are you doing?
No.
What was that?
You keep your Last Jedi out of this Batman podcast.
You keep your podcast out of my Last Jedi. No.
So, for those of you wondering about the story, as we get through issue 2 of the series, the Joker is cured. He's taking these pills, and supposedly they cure him. He becomes Jack Napier. As Dan already said, he goes the political route and tries to fight Batman through, all of that. I love the fact that there's two Harleys, like, quote-unquote fake Harley and real Harley, and then fake Harley turns into Neo Joke. Well, because there was, again, this is why I say Sean Murphy really loves Batman in general, not the character specifically, but the Batman franchise, is because he's got all this stuff in here that I can draw allusions to. The fake Harley, real Harley thing, that happened in one episode of Batman the Animated Series when I think it was Mad Love, where he hit her and she just left, and he went to replace her, and he got this dumber than a box of rocks version of her.
Yes, that was
kind of a thing. So that's what I see with the two Harleys thing here, and I thought that was really cool.
I don't know if that's what he was going for. To me, what I took that as was looking at kind of Harley Quinn, that character, and kind of what she was first as, like what she was established as, kind of this strong-willed character, and her how she kind of fell in love with the Jack Napier part of, or the more humanistic part of a Joker, and then what she kind of morphed into within the last 5-6 years, kind of just a one-note, very generic kind of mini Deadpool type of character.
Yeah.
I took it as him basically looking at kind of basically what Harley was, and then what she devolved into, and then I was actually kind of surprised that I thought that was going to be the last we saw of that character, but knowing that she eventually becomes Neo Joker and where that leads to.
Yeah. But. Yeah, the story within the first 3 and 4 issues of the 8 issues, I love the complexity of it. I love all of the stuff with it. Again, there's a scene in issue 2 here, where, again, when I say that I feel that Sean loves the Batman franchise, and I make my own allusion to BTAS and the fake Harley, yeah, you're completely right, Dan. It is two different sides of her personality, kind of a thing. But my point in saying that is that I see things in this that he's alluding to, and we get to a scene with Napier and the other villains, and I don't care what anyone says. As soon as you hear Croc say, "It was a big rock," anyone that's seen Batman the Animated Series, Almost Got Him, will know that that's a reference to that episode from Batman the Animated Series.
One of the best episodes ever.
Absolutely. And I love the whole villain thing. I love the thing with... there aren't many... you were saying earlier about how there aren't many Batman stories that can be unique and interesting, and because Batman's done everything over the last 80 years.
To clarify, that's what I'm saying, that sometimes he can become a stagnant character where he's the least interesting thing. If you look at a lot of Batman stories, it often is him as a character. It's him as a character. It's always like he stays stagnant, and it's always the same type of story. Even in like the best, like I love Scott Snyder's run of Batman, but he's always a second tier character, which is what made Tom King's run really fascinating. Is that Batman's actually been the main character of his own book, right. And that's what I liked about that. This is why I like interpretations of this, is if being able to try to do something different and develop him and kind of look at kind of the cracks of the psyche of someone that would have to do this. Like, what would someone be like? Even if you go back to Dark Knight Returns, I mean, which is kind of a cliche to do anytime you talk about a Batman book, but that was redefining what Batman in some ways. I mean, it's not like maybe Frank Miller gets a little bit too much credit of redefining Batman, but it certainly was very different than the interpretations around that time period. And I think this is, in that same spirit of saying, okay, well, let's create an offshoot and do something that is, just tell a story. And I think, taking bits and pieces, there's, like I think there are clearly, even Sean Murphy has said, he's taken from everything, from all, from Tim Burton verse, from the animated series, and you see that eventually by the end of this with all the Batmobiles. So I think he's taken bits and pieces of everything to create his own Murphy verse, if you want to call it that. But yeah.
The thing I was going to point out was that with certain of Batman's villains, just like with Spider-Man and Superman and whatever, I've seen so many different tries with certain characters that it's very rare that I get shocked on what they do with it. And what I mean by this is, as issue 2 comes to a close, we have Clayface. And Clayface is not long for this world. He's going to be scattered, smothered, and covered for breakfast tomorrow or something, because that was a twist I did not see coming. I understand why he did it, because it's the Hatter helmet, the mind control thing could not work on every single army person, like turning the super criminals into an army. The only way you can do it is kill Clayface and feed him to everybody. Oh my god.
That part just showed to me how horrific it must be to be Clayface. All the time you're like, oh, Clayface, that's cool, but you're like, oh, this is horrific, because to be able to, I don't say survive that, but just to be, maybe conscious when all this is happening must be the most horrific thing of all time.
So through issue 3, each of these issues has a really shocking moment for me, and much like in Nightwing New Order, when some stupid cop killed, I don't want to say stupid cop, some stupid person on the Nightwing force or whatever it was killed Alfred. Anytime Alfred Pennyworth dies, I'm like, oh, hell no, they didn't just do that. But I love what they did here with the Freeze story, and they call back to the McGregor syndrome. As much as everyone hates Batman and Robin, jazz hands, we hate that movie, but they call back to that. They have Alfred's funeral kind of thing, and this is... Bruce has lost his parents. Obviously, that's still a thing in this quote-unquote Murphyverse, as Dan said. But losing Alfred was the last part of Bruce's soul. That's why, I mean, yeah, earlier Bruce kind of didn't care, but, losing the only father he's really known since his parents died, that's going to drive a guy over the edge.
Maybe this should have happened first. Maybe they should have had the Alfred death scene in the beginning, which would lead to Batman being a dick. But no, I liked everything they did with the Alfred stuff. Mm-hmm. I didn't even think about the McGregor syndrome. So I was like, oh yeah, that was referenced in the greatest Batman movie of all time, Batman and Robin. I joke. It's not the greatest. I was joking. There's a credit card in there. No, it's a horrible film.
I will say one thing that's kind of weird with this series is, knowing that Murphy's both, drawing and writing it, his dialogue is much more verbose than you would expect, because typically when you have a writer and artist doing a book, they tend to let the art speak for itself almost to a default at times. But this is a relatively wordy book, especially with the Napier dialogue. I mean, I know that's kind of the point, because that's the weapon he's using. It does get a little overbearing at times. Like, I think he could probably have, there's times where he uses 10 words when he maybe could have used 5. But I just found it kind of interesting that knowing that he is the artist here, it's very rare to see that. It's usually the opposite, where you get very little dialogue, because it's like they don't want it to cover over the page and cover over the art. But he seems, which again could be because he's more of an artist. The scripting, and sometimes that's the hardest part for an artist turning into a writer or writing for more so than they're drawing. Because Murphy's worked with some great people like Remender and stuff like that. So I think that's like where, on a scripting perspective, that's where it gets bogged down a little bit, especially the lettering and the dialogue boxes. It kind of overtake the page, and unfortunately cover the art to like a unnecessary extent. It's not always there, but it happens, especially within, like I mentioned, Napier dialogue or those different news sequences. Again, that very much harken back to something like Dark Knight. But I just found that kind of intriguing that was something that was happening here. So I'd be interested in seeing how that goes because the next series that comes after this.
Yeah, I think writers, whatever you want to call them, writer-artists, because I don't want to say they have full control, but they almost do over the creative part of it. I think they work in all of the dialogue to where it should be without taking away from the actual art. Like, again, I've praised this since the pullbag started, since I started doing digital comics. Comixology's guided view on issue 3 where Harley's like, I'm really proud of you, Puddin', really? Take me out tonight. And, we cut to a bigger scene where, Duke says, take her out, you clown, or someone else will. And we cut to them, cutting a rug. It shows a panel of basically her with her arm around the back of his neck in this hot ass, red dress kind of like, I just think that the writing and where the letters are placed and the way the story is done, especially with the way that I read it in the guided view, I think it actually works for writer-artists. I think sometimes when you have a writer and an artist, sometimes signals may get crossed, sometimes they won't, who knows. But I think Sean's stuff actually does work for him doing both sides of it.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't. I think it at times his scripting, his dialogue can get overbearing. Especially when it gets like, I think one thing he struggles with is providing context or backstory for things, and that's where I think it's a little bit overbearing. Like, I'm not saying it's bad per se, but it's just there are times where there are words on the page that don't necessarily need to be there because you can just let the art speak for itself. And I think where that becomes a little bit more challenging is where there's a little bit more heavy lifting, because you have those Napier speeches where he's kind of going on these different like diatribes about what's wrong with what's wrong with Batman. They're not. It's not always there, but there are times where it's like, whoa, that's a page full of a lot of. That's like almost. If I didn't know better, I'd be thinking I'm reading a Brian Michael Bendis book with all the dialogue. I don't necessarily think dialogue's a bad thing. I just don't think it's his strength as a writer, or as a creator. So when it's the one thing, like bringing.
If he was working with another artist, if he was working with if he just had writing duties, you think like half of this is cut down, dialogue wise.
I think if he was working with someone like Remender, he would probably be able to tighten up a little bit. It's not necessarily bad. I think it's just that it's you're doing a lot, so it's challenging, but it's still really well done. I'm not just saying it's not well done, but I'm just the one area where I think if you're looking for improvement or where it's where it doesn't match up to like the art to me is like a 10 out of 10. That's where it's not to that level, which is it's to be said because it's a difference between a person who writes for a living and a person who does art for a living. Like I think a person who does that remarkably well is someone like Jeff Lemire, who's kind of the opposite, where he's much more minimalist, and that's kind of what I expected. And again, that's may just be my subjective point of view, because when you typically go into a book and it's an artist writing it, like I mentioned, it's usually like, oh, they just decided not to put any words on this page over and over again. But that's not the case here. So it was more of a shock because of it more than a poor execution choice.
Yeah. And the way they end issue 4, again, going to the story of the, Neo Joker, or the alternate Harley, telling kind of her story to Mad Hatter and all of this, and then they see this archival footage of the Freeze and the Waynes and
the Nazi stuff.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. Like, that's a way to end, like, oh, wow. I mean, who'd ever thought, Nazi stuff would be in a Batman book? I mean, it's not like, Indiana Jones and, Junior can come in on, a motorcycle with a buggy.
But I completely bought, like, when they explain Freeze's backstory, I'm like,
yeah,
huh, yep, that makes a lot of sense, especially with the rapid aging thing. I was like, oh, yeah, why wouldn't he be? I mean, I guess Freeze's backstory has been limited to me as much. So when it's ripe to expand upon or, do whatever you want with, which I never saw the Nazi thing coming, and when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That would make a lot of sense. And the arc he kind of goes through, though he's kind of like the C character of this whole story. I dug Freeze a lot. Every time Freeze shows up, I know you said it took you out of the book a little bit. Maybe because I'm a huge Freeze fan, but just I want to know more. Tell me more about that.
It wasn't that it took me. It wasn't the fact that he was there that took me out of the book. What takes me out of the book is, like, ending the scene with Joker and Harley, like, going home, where it has their dialogue on their page, and then it starts Freeze's page, and it has the finish of what their dialogue is. It's more so like the pacing, not pacing, but the way it's displayed, the way that it's formatted. That it wasn't that Freeze is as much a part of this story as any of the other characters in it, and it's absolutely awesome. I think it's great, and like, if I had been reading this single issue, oh man, I wouldn't be able to deal. Like, I'm glad I waited for the trade, because I would not be able to just deal on a monthly basis or however. I think this was a monthly series for, obviously, the 8 issues, but I don't know. As we get to the end of the 4th issue, DJ, how are you feeling about the story at this quote unquote halfway point?
At this point, I like where it was. I like where it's going, as it's going. I kind of I think that they could have done something a little bit more. What's the word? I don't say better with Batman. The way they treated Batman kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, and so that's my only hindrance. But again, when it comes to like the artistic style of this book, I mean, this book is great, and I like. I was on Comic Concierge with Dan before, and we're watching Gotham Central, and I love that gritty, style, and I think there's a little bit of that here. It's just the way that Murphy kind of uses certain characters, and I know it's a Elseworld story. It was just hard for me to wrap my brain around the treatment of certain characters, Barbara Gordon, Batman, stuff like that. But I like where it was. I like the intent.
Mm-hmm. Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I really kind of enjoy kind of this experiment that he's doing, right? Like, I like that. I thought it was going to be a simple, like, okay, Batman turns evil and then Joker's good and go from there. But I like that it ended being more of kind of the deconstruction of the mythos of Batman's world, along with that, and pointing out out some of the legitimate logical issues with a character like Batman and what that would mean, and then having someone like Joker take a different approach. And there's a lot here going on, perhaps too much at times. With sometimes maybe a character like Neo Joker, her development seems a little bit weird. A little bit more fast paced than some of the others. As GJ pointed out, it is a gorgeous book. I mean, Morphe has a very gothic aesthetic that, it doesn't necessarily feel like, if you go to like the Tim Burton movie, it has a similar feeling, but it's a little bit more cartoonish. Where this, it has that more, it has that feel. It's funny they mentioned anime because Sean Murphy's done something like Tokyo Ghost, which is very much in that realm. So, I think it kind of all it's all put together pretty well, and I kind of just like the no holds barred of it in a way, and I do also really like the way he draws Batman. He looks just like a hulking figure, but not to the point where it's like actually the Hulk. But I don't know. I enjoy this world that he's creating, and like this little universe that's like picking and choosing different things it wants to use. So,
yep, absolutely. All right, well, I don't know what's going on, folks, but I'm starting to get a cough in the back of my throat.
I'm coughing too.
Oh no, it's Joker gas.
A catastrophe. Smoke 'em if you got 'em. A plume of purple puffs puts down our podcast pals. A situation that may be more of a gas than we expected. Will the tenacious trio catch their breath, or will they be too choked up to continue? Find out next time on Geekcast Radio's Pullbag. Same bad time, same bad podcast channel.
You've just heard the latest episode of The Pullbag, the GCRN's first comic review and discussion podcast. There are several ways to get in touch with us and leave feedback for the show. You can visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on the episode and all of our different podcasts. You can rate and leave a review for the show on iTunes. Be sure to leave us feedback. Become a fan of us on Facebook, facebook.com/thepullbag. Send us an email, feedback@geekcastradio.com. Follow us on Twitter @thepullbag and @geekcastradio. So until next time, make your great escape into comics and unleash the geek in you.
we're making a sketch based on if that was real. So coming out of Megatron's idea, Megatron's like, yeah, we should do something on Space Force if it was a real thing. I was like, well, I'm just gonna make it based on Delta Force with Chuck Norris, so let's do that.
Yeah, I see Mad About Trump on Comixology for $10. I see Trump's Titans, which is a series, and I see the Trump Titans Space Force.
The Judas contract will be really interesting in Trump Titans.
Yeah.
I have the Trump Titans. Let's see, the first one is Trump Titans versus Diversity #1, and then, like Dan said, Trump Titans Space Force #1 under the Trump Titans series logo. I've got the IDW book that they put out by Shannon Wheeler, Shit My President Says, and I want to do that on the podcast eventually, just because it's illustrations done by Shannon Wheeler from the point of Donald Trump starting his Twitter up till just after he won the election, or after he gets sworn in. And I've been wanting to do it, and I haven't had the time to do any of this stuff.